Chapter 2. I awoke the next morning to a dead, ghostly silence. The generator had shut off sometimes early this morning. Apparently it had run out of fuel because I forgot to change it with a full tank during the missile attack. But the missing generator sound was not what concerned me. As I sat up in the bunk, I glanced around the room, which was pitch black, since no light could travel through several feet of dirt and stone above. I reached into my right front pocket and pulled out my lighter, and, holding it outstretched, I struck it. The cheap butane lighter produced a dim, burning glow in the depths of the tomb, causing a cast of evil, lurking shadows to dance across the room. The radio on the table caught my eye. There was the problem. I had been listening to it all day and night, and had become used to hearing the broadcast that came from it. I must have gotten up late last night, turned it off without even remembering it. Moving towards the radio caused my fire to extinguish from my lighter, throwing me back into the darkness. As I began to strike the lighter again, I noticed a very faint red glow emanating from the radio. It was still on. Flicking the lighter back on, I watched the dial move as I rolled through the stations, but I heard nothing but dead air. Grabbing the flashlight off the table, I turned it on and stuffed the lighter back into my pocket, and quickly walked back to the generator room. After disconnecting the empty fuel tank from the generator, I pulled a full 15-pound tank down from the shelves and reconnected it. I could hear the propane hiss into the empty fuel lines when I turned the valve on, and just as before, the generator fired up and the beast roared out loud after flipping the ignition switch. Then I left the room and flipped the main breaker switch, causing the tomb to illuminate once again. Walking to the table, I set down the flashlight and continued to the supply room to retrieve a package of batteries for the radio. I was hoping the batteries in the radios had almost died, and that's why I wasn't getting any new receptions. After taking the back of the cover off, replacing the batteries, I ran through the stations again, but still, only dead air. I even tried the AM channels, but still nothing. Apparently someone or something had either destroyed the radio stations my radio could reach, or the airways were somehow being jammed, so I turned off the radio until I could make a stronger receiver for it. After smoking a cigarette, I went into the cooking area and fixed myself breakfast of champions. That's right, Cheerios. Then after cleaning up, I went back to the supply room and then returned to the main room with 2 large cardboard boxes, and after 15 minutes, I had fully completed the setup of a state-of-the-art sound system. Well, actually, it was my old record player. I had bought it at a yard sale a few years back, and I placed it down here for storage. I had always enjoyed the sound of old records, and the only reason I had purchased it was because the man selling it also had a box of old record albums that came with it. I set the box of albums on the end of the table, which contained nothing but classic rock and roll. I began to flip through them until I came across a Led Zeppelin album and stopped searching. I pulled the record out of his jacket and put it on the player. The music echoed all throughout the tomb, bouncing off the solid concrete walls, causing the sound of a small auditorium concert in here. Now this dreary tomb had turned into a juke joint, and drinks were free. So without a thought, I went to the refrigerator, pulled myself out a bottle of whiskey, and then pulled out a frosted glass out of the freezer, and placed them both on the counter. Then went back to the storage room and dug into the supply rack until I found my stash of 3-liter Cokes, and brought 2 bottles back to the counter, poured myself a nice glass of Coke and whiskey. After lighting another cigarette, I relaxed at the table and listened to Robert Plant and Jimmy Page perform the greatest rock and roll song ever, Heartbreaker. Sitting there, I started thinking back when I was younger, back when I first joined an amateur rock band. Oh, did we suck. We thought we were going to be rock stars, but we sucked. Later in life, I joined the Marines. I actually enjoyed being in the Marines. It just felt right for me. When I was crawling through the bush, I actually felt like I was at home, while I sat there for days stalking a target, patiently waiting for a shot. No, don't get me wrong, I'm no natural-born killer. As a matter of fact, it was very hard for me to make my first confirmed kill, and even harder to forget the face of the man I shot. But over time, and plenty of alcohol, all my kills eventually become one big blur. When I was a kid, I had spent most of my childhood outdoors. And when all the other kids got to go to Disneyland for summer vacation, I would spend mine out at the creek, learning how to track animals that would come out to drink water late at night. As I got a little older, I would hike 3 days through densely vegetated brush into the woods until I found a spot I was happy with to put up camp. I would hunt small game, fish for 2 weeks, living off the land before heading back home. I loved it. That was how I spent my vacation. When I joined the Marine Corps, I joined as infantry. After 3 years of humping it with the grunts, I had an opportunity to go to sniper school. After a 10-week training course that was 10 times worse than any boot camp, many men were washed out or eliminated. But not me. I had a natural ability to move like the shadows through the woods, without being seen or heard, and every time I fired my rifle, spotters could not detect my position, and all my shots were on the marks. I finally graduated sniper school at the top of my class. Out of 30 men, only 13 of us actually graduated. Shortly after training, I was put on the active duty roster and was sent to my first special operations mission in the South Pacific as a spotter for a veteran sniper, Master Gunnery Sergeant Randall. At first, it seemed to be a real hard ass. But after the first 3 days of running through the jungle, I realized he wasn't just a hard ass, he was a heavily seasoned hard ass. As it turned out, I worked with Randall on 4 other occasions, and I was always his spotter. I learned more from working with that man than I ever did in school. He had a gift. It was not until 4 years later when I finally got my first mission ops as a trigger. The heat was almost unbearable, and it was getting hotter with every step we took. I was dropped in by helicopter, along with my spotter, Sergeant Lance, in the Iraqi desert, 36 miles north of Baghdad. We were fully dressed in typical Arabic desert nomad clothing, which hid our weapons and equipment. We ran for 2 days through the unforgiving sand and heat before we entered the city of Baghdad, our target city, and we proceeded to walk through the crowded city as ghosts. The 2-day run did us tremendous amount of good, because the disguise we were wearing was now stinking to high heaven, and no one in the streets even looked twice at us, if they ever looked once. We were just shadows. By midday, we arrived at our target shooter's nest, a 10-floor hotel smack in the middle of Baghdad. We proceeded as planned to the 8th floor and entered room 813. The room was quite nice. It was well furnished with the common Arabic colors, themes, but our eyes were on the 2 windows that overlooked the city on the east. After locking the door, we both grabbed the 12-foot-long dining room table and slid it lengthwise, parallel to the window, and made sure the lights were out in the room. First, I removed my headdress, and then removed my Barrett 50 caliber sniper rifle from under my robe, and climbed on top of the table, stretched out facing the window with my rifle in the prone fire position, making sure I stayed a good 10 feet from the window. Sergeant Lance was already finished positioning a chair 10 feet from the second window to my left, and was sitting in it facing the window with his rangefinder in hand. Within 5 minutes, he confirmed target area was at 750 meters out. Searching through my scope, I adjusted it to the range. I confirmed the target area, and we waited. The end of my rifle was supported on a bipod, so the 50 caliber rifle was weightless. Patience is a virtue, but in this line of business, patience is a necessity. But after 2 days of stalking Baghdad security officers, I broke off the rifle and ate an MRE, since it had been 4 days since I had last ate. And after eating, I manned the rifle again, told my spotter to eat chow. Within 6 hours after dinner, a gray Land Rover pulled up in front of the security office, and before I even asked Sergeant Lance, he reported, "Target vehicle acquired at 710 meters. After confirming the target, the rear passenger door opened on the vehicle, and a short, fat, 40-year-old Arabic man emerged from the vehicle. After range from my spotter, at 720 meters, I began to squeeze the trigger, and right when the round fired, the target turned around, looked up straight at me. He was dead before he knew it. The round had entered his left eye and nearly exploded his head clean off, blowing brain matter and shards of skull all over the security office steps. His body almost did a complete backflip when the bullet exited his head, and when his body hit the ground, there was still a fine red mist floating in the air. We were positioned far enough away from the window, and we had enough distance from our target. I knew no one saw our assault from our position. So after my spotter confirmed the target was eliminated, we proceeded to the extraction area, another 20 miles south of Baghdad. After finishing my drink, I got up from the table and took the Zeppelin record off the turntable. I dug around and quickly replaced it with a Billy Idol record, and returned to the cooking area for another drink. After fixing another Coke and whiskey, I placed it on the table and walked back into the supply room, and fetched the 2 duffel bags I placed in the racks yesterday, and brought them back to the table. Maybe I was being a little paranoid, but I wanted to do an inventory check on the contents of the bag. After setting the 2 canvas duffel bags on the bench, I began examining the contents of the bags as I pulled them out one at a time. First, pulling the coiled manila rope out of the bag, I placed it on the far end of the table where my album sat. I then unloaded the weapons and ammunition onto the table. When the bags were empty, I had bundles of firearms all over the 6-foot-long table. I had 3 rifles I considered my sniper rifles. 2 were identical black synthetic stock Springfield 308s. Both were equipped with high-powered scopes. The only difference was one was a daylight scope, and the other was a 3rd-generation night vision scope. The 3rd rifle was my Barrett 50 caliber sniper rifle. This thing weighed about 22 pounds empty. It was kind of bulky since it was 45 inches long, but it had a range of around 1,800 meters. This was a vital weapon in my arsenal. I had 4 black synthetic stock Mossberg 500 shotguns, 3 M4A1 carbines, 2 M1s, 3 M16s, synthetic stock, and 3 9mm pistols. After completing my inspection on the firing chamber, slides, and barrels, I put all the weapons back in the bags except for one of the shotguns, which I left on the table, and took them back to the supply room and placed them back in the rack. I returned to the table with 2 large green metal boxes. These were empty M60 ammunition boxes, which I used to store my ammunition. I placed everything in the boxes except for 1 box of 3-inch Magnum double-aught buckshot, and then hauled them back into the supply room, and placed them on the bottom rack next to the 4 other ammo boxes that were already full. Then I returned to the cooking area and fixed another drink, grabbed the flashlight from the table, and walked to the spot where the tunnel opened up into the main room, and shined it straight up the shaft, checking to see if the lock chain was still in place. And it was, and it better stay there, because if some poor soul just happened to get that hatch open, I would meet them with buckshot. After turning off the flashlight, I took another swallow of my drink and lit another cigarette and sat down and listened to my records. I was going through the albums again, just browsing, when I noticed the coiled manila rope still on the table, and after just changing the record to a Van Halen album, I took the rope to the supply room. While searching through the supply rack for the rope storage section, I stumbled across the Fallout Emergency Communication System, which was just another fancy name for a high-powered CB radio. After placing the rope in the rack, I took the CB and a roll of black insulated wire to the table, and while lighting another cigarette, I walked back to the supply room and searched the rack until I came back with an electrical pigtail made with clamps on one end that resembled jumper cables, and on the other end of the long insulated wire were 2 single-pin plugs. After taking the mattress off the bottom bunk closest to the supply room, I placed the turntable, speakers, and albums onto the bunk, then placed the CB on the bunk. I hooked up the single 30-foot wire to the back of the CB and ran it along the north wall into the supply room until I came to a wall jack that resembled a TV cable jack, and plugged it in. This was the antenna hookup. The lanyard was above ground some 60 yards away from the tomb. When I walked back to the CB and plugged it in, the electrical pigtail, and ran the long cord to the solar batteries and connected it to the battery, then walked back to the CB radio and turned it on. I flipped through the channels until I reached channel 19, which was a heavily used channel, but today it was silent. I picked up the microphone and called out, "Break 19 for radio check," but I was met with silence. So I left it on, restarted my Van Halen record. I had been listening to my records all day when finally my alcohol level got the best of me. After checking the CB channel 19 again, I left the microphone keyed up with rubber band and started playing disc jockey for all of America. Well, at least as far as my radio could broadcast. I started off with the George Thorogood album and continued all night until I finally passed out drinking too much. At 4:37 a.m., I woke up with a massive headache and one hellacious hangover. I got up, took a shower in the small 2.5 by 2.5 foot shower stall, then walked to the supply room, ass naked, and retrieved the black duffel bag of clothes. Hell, what did I care? After all, I was by myself down here. I could walk around here naked if I wanted to. While getting dressed in a pair of blue jeans and a white t-shirt, my eyes laid on the rubber band around the microphone, keying everything I did. My shower, everything. Although it was just a radio and no one could see me, I could not help but get embarrassed. I quickly finished getting dressed and took the rubber band off the microphone, thus ending my radio career. Or so I thought. Around 6:30 a.m., the CB came alive with a woman's voice. At first, I thought I was imagining things, so I turned the volume dial up, and within seconds, the woman's voice came over the CB again. "Hello? Are you there?" Shit. I was not imagining things. Someone was on the CB channel. The voice was young, around early 20s, and I was hesitant at first to answer the radio. "Hello? DJ Big Daddy? Are you there?" Oh my God. I could not believe she just said that. Just how big of an ass did I make of myself last night? I didn't think anyone was listening to my drunk ass last night. And to be honest, I was too drunk to even care. Completely embarrassed to the point of blushing, I picked up the microphone and spoke into it. "Who is this?" The radio was quiet for almost 30 seconds before she answered. "This is Sky. Who is this?" Sky, I thought. Sounded like an alias to me. But hell, apparently I called myself DJ Big Daddy during my broadcast last night. After a few moments, I acknowledged myself as Ben. Then I lit another cigarette, then sheepishly asked how long she had been listening to the CB last night. She replied that they had been listening to it for at least 4 hours before I passed out. They? Who are they? I asked her to identify who and how many were with her and were listening to our conversation. And after a few moments of silence, she told me that there were 3 of them, counting herself. The other 2 was a man named Billy and his 16-year-old son, Stephen. After talking to Sky for about an hour, the reason of our conversation finally came up. Apparently, while I was intoxicated last night, I had told every living soul with a CB I was broadcasting from a bomb shelter. And now they wanted in. How could I have been so stupid? Why didn't I just let everyone know in the world my credit card number and social security while I was at it? Only after I'd calmed down and got my wits together, I asked her if she knew where the shelter was. And thank God, to my relief, she said no. Apparently I was not a complete moron, just a jackass. I had kept my location a secret. The urge to turn off the CB and forget the whole conversation was tremendous. I mean, it was not my responsibility to take care of those people. Hell, I didn't even know them. I picked up the microphone and told her to stand by. Quickly, I lit another cigarette and walked into the cooking area. I paced the floor for about 20 minutes, chain smoking 5 cigarettes before I opened up the deep freeze. I had plenty of meat. Last hunting season, between what I had killed and what was given to me, had the deep freeze full. I had enough canned goods to last many years. I had several boxes of MREs in the supply room and long-term food storage. The shelter itself was designed for 6 people, and I had enough water and air purifier scrubs to accommodate that many. So after checking and rechecking my supplies, I picked up the microphone and asked where she was. After she gave me her location, I devised a plan. They were almost 20 miles north of me. Sky said they could travel, so I gave them directions to a bridge about 5 miles from my house and told them I'd meet them there. I also told them to bring what food and clothing they could bring, and if they had weapons, they were welcome to bring them. But they must be bagged up and secured so no one could have easy access to them. For my own safety. Then I told them once they reached the bridge, They were to get out of their vehicles and walk under the bridge together. After they agreed to my terms, I walked back to the supply room and grabbed the coil manila rope from the racks and walked back to the table. Loaded the shotgun with 6 rounds of buckshot and proceeded up the 40-foot tunnel hatch. After removing the lock chain, I told myself how stupid I was for doing this. Then I popped the hatch and went to my house. After going inside my house to get the car keys, I got into my red 1970 Chevelle Super Sport and set the rope and shotgun on the passenger seat and cranked up the car. The massive big block 454 engine was loud enough to jar the ground, and I put the floor shifter in reverse and backed out of the driveway and onto the road, then put it in drive and drove to the bridge. I waited at the bridge for 35 minutes before a metallic green Chevy Silverado pulled up on the north side of the bridge and stopped. As I sat there waiting in my car, the passenger side door opened, and a short, stocky, black-haired man stepped out. It was followed by a slender, slightly taller man with black hair. After the passenger door shut, the driver's side door opened, and a short woman with shoulder-length blonde hair jumped out and walked to the passenger side of the truck, where they briefly exchanged words and pointed towards my vehicle. Then, as instructed, they climbed down the embankment and waited underneath the bridge. Then I put my vehicle in drive and drove to the other side of the bridge, where I parked my car behind the truck. After grabbing my shotgun, I got out of the car, crept up to the driver's side of the truck, and made sure the cab was clear of any surprises. Then I walked down to meet Sky and the others. I was extremely nervous as I rounded the embankment, but when I was 20 yards from them, I could tell they were more terrified of me. Maybe I went overkilling with the whole cloak and dagger meeting, or maybe it was a shotgun I was carrying, and the closer I got to the group, the more terrified they looked. Sky looked as if she was ready to take off running through the woods, and the older, shorter man, who I now assumed was Billy, tried to hide his son behind him, which was nearly impossible to do since his 16-year-old son was much taller than he was. When I was sure they were unarmed, I lowered my shotgun, aimed the barrel towards the ground, and when I was within 10 feet of Sky, I told him my name was Ben, and I apologized for bringing the firearm, but I had to make sure there was no dangers. After a brief introduction, we all went back to our vehicles and they followed me to my house. Billy turned out to be a 36-year-old former Army Ranger. He only stood 5 foot 6 inches tall, but he was built like a brick house. His son Stephen, well, he was your typical abnormally tall 16-year-old teenager who was more interested in my car and trying to impress Sky than being worried about the war that's fixing to come. Sky was in a league of her own. She was 25 years old, stood 5 feet 4 inches tall, and an absolute knockout. I could not help but blush a little every time she called me DJ Big Daddy. She knew it embarrassed me, and to be honest, I think she enjoyed making me squirm. Once we got to my house, we unloaded the pickup and sent Stephen down in the tomb first, so he could untie the bags as I sent them down with the manila rope. After all their supplies and bags were in the tomb, Billy went down the tunnel. Then Sky stepped into the hatch. I couldn't help but watch her bend over a little while trying to get into the tunnel. Why she did it that way, I don't really know, but I was glad she did, because I enjoy the scenery, and she went down in the tunnel. I kind of kicked myself a little. I wished I had went down before her, so I can watch her climb down. But I needed to lock the hatch, and also needed to keep my head out of the gutter, because we were all going to be down here for a while, and I needed to behave. By the time I got down into the tunnel, Sky and the rest of them had their bags on the table, 9 bags total. After giving my new occupants a tour of the tomb, I helped unload their bags. Each of them brought a duffel bag of clothes. 5 bags contained canned foods, and the last bag contained a small collection of weapons which Billy brought with him. There was an M16, 2 Tech-9 pistols, 1 tactical shotgun, and about 25 pounds of ammunition. After clearing off a spot in the supply rack, I helped place their bags in it. Since the radio went out yesterday, I started inquiring about what has happened topside. Luckily, Billy was well informed and answered most of my questions with great precision. Unsure how the war would unfold, I assured everyone that they were welcome in the tomb, and in no way would the shelter be ran as a dictatorship. We were all in it together, and together we would make all decisions concerning the shelter. Hell, even Stephen had a voice. That is the end of Chapter 2.